Joyboy is not a person because he's actually two people, and every reincarnation of him and Nika has actually been two different people working together as well, including the current era where the new Joyboy is a character that grew up alongside animals, befriending them very naturally. He was born to a super powerful figure in the world and eventually grew up to idolize an incredibly prominent and powerful pirate. He was then denied a spot on their crew and then made it his life mission to prove that he was worthy of that spot when he became a teenager. Of course, he loves food, he's incredibly powerful according to everyone around him, and this is the man who will be the next sun god. But wait a second here, that actually works for two people? Well, yeah, it does, and that's pretty much the entire point of this video. Luffy and Loki being two sides of the same coin is very crucial to the way that this series is going to evolve from now on, and I do believe that their unique dynamic goes much deeper than just being similar dudes. And the reason that I think this lies in a few key details, such as the beginning of this very arc, Loki's relationship and exchanges with Luffy, and most importantly, the massive mural that seems to have changed the entire One Piece community forever. Because all of these things I just mentioned have subtle elements pointing towards the idea that Loki isn't quite wrong in his belief that he also is the sun god. Now, instead, I do think that all of these things point to the idea that Loki does fit a different role where he completes a pair of sun gods in every era. Because as I want to show you in this video, there's a bunch of evidence that a hidden sun god also aided and rivaled Joyboy during the Void Century, and then even Nika during the very first world of the One Piece era. And for our modern era, Luffy's era, Elbaf will be the arc that his shadow sun god is finally revealed as well. And this has been pretty much teased since the moment that the crew has landed on this island. I mean, come on, there's really no denying it at this point in the story. Loki's past and life parallel Luffy's incredibly closely, and I'm pretty near certain that Oda wants us to tie these two characters together as well. Because remember the beginning of this video? Could you tell me the difference between Loki and Luffy when I describe them objectively? Yeah, of course not. They have an incredibly similar sounding background. The only difference here pretty much is that Loki is a rowdy prankster, as he's coarse and rough and irritating to those around him, unlike the happy-go-lucky Luffy. And honestly, if Loki had just been raised like Luffy, he may have been much kinder and much more fun anyways. And if Luffy, on the other hand, was raised like Loki, he might have been a lot more rude and brutal. And I hope you'll agree with me that hints of all of these traits do actually exist in both of them already, you know, with Loki's romantic origins with Lola, and also his kind side being shown to Molsa, while Luffy's dark and more brutal side appears during a lot of the battles that he's in as well. And these tons of parallels between them makes me believe that Loki's role in the endgame of the series is gonna be as a great ally to Luffy, but even more than that. Arguably, it's gonna be greater than anyone else so far in the entire story, because they are two kindred spirits, two sides of the same coin, something that Oda loves to do. And while Luffy may be the quote-unquote true sun god with the actual Nika fruit and the cloudy appearance, Loki will end up being the perceived sun god of this era instead. And yes, I do know that it sounds kind of odd for Loki to be the one who the world will regard as the sun god, but I do think it does actually line up way more with Luffy's character if this is how the story actually goes. Think about it. Luffy's all about being the most free. He doesn't really care about the title of being known as a god. He even tells Jorul that to his face in this arc. And in chapter 1136, after the appearance of the sun god is described, Luffy states that that must be why everyone said I reminded them of him, but that has nothing to do with me. That's a literal Luffy quote. What he's saying here is that Luffy doesn't care about the recognition for his actions. He let Momo and the concept of Joyboy take credit for his action on Wano as well, and as I described earlier, he let Smoker and many others take credit for his actions on Alabasta and in several other arcs as well. Bottom line here is, Luffy does not want the title of Sun God, but you know who does? Loki here, which is exactly why I think that he will inevitably take the title of Sun God in Luffy's stead, something that, as you'll see throughout this video, is a real big trend in the history of all of One Piece, but when it comes to Loki specifically, he may embody it way more than any other sun god in history. But now let's actually look at some evidence here. Loki in the manga proudly proclaims himself to everyone, including including Luffy, that he is the destructive sun god. He wants that title, and I do think that Luffy is gonna let him actually have it. At the end of the day, his goal is to be Pirate King, not the warrior of liberation or whatever that's supposed to be, right? Like, Luffy doesn't care about it. And I do believe that there's gonna be a dramatic flip between the Second World War in the One Piece world, you know, like Joyboy's era, and the Third World War that we're gonna live through with Luffy. Because this time, instead of Joyboy being the one who gets all the credit of being the sun god, in our current era, the Nika fruit user and will carrier will actually be the shadow sun god, is what I'm gonna call this. You know, kind of the one who does all the great actions behind the scenes, but then lets the other half of the bond take the credit instead. Now, Luffy's action on Elbaf and in the final saga in general are just going to be attributed to Loki. So what I'm saying here is, I think there's a world where Luffy's actions on Elbaf and in the entire final saga might at the end of the day be attributed to Loki. Sounds crazy, but just watch. I may of course be wrong about this, but I really don't think so. And I do think it has to happen for the final war to even be successful in the first place. Here's why. Oda has been very direct in stating that the giants will end up shifting the power scales in the upcoming war between the Holy Land and I guess pretty much the rest of the world at this point. And while we always knew that everyone wanted the giants, at this point there's just no room for any doubt anymore, because Gunko quite literally said that in chapter 1146 right here. Now that of course means that winning the hearts of the people over and uniting all of the Elbaf giants under one banner will be a crucial feat for whoever manages to do so. And given that we hopefully agree that Luffy is the one who's supposed to win at the end, there's really only one logical person on the island right now that can really pull that off: Loki. Sorry, not Luffy. Sorry also Hyrogin, but I don't think either of you could actually pull it off. Not alone at least. But with little bro right here, anything is possible. Also, I only really wanted to throw Hyrogin in here because as much as I would like Loki to just be the solo king, I don't think that Oda is pushing us that way at the moment. It kind of seems like the plan will be to have both of these lead, you know, as a duo, the same way that the giant warrior pirates have their captains lead as a pair as well, and then Jorul and Jorul. There is a pattern here with the entire, you know, giant pirates, but Loki will be the one responsible, I think, for recruiting all the warriors of Elbaf to Luffy's side. He's the one capable of showing the old school giants that Elbaf is safe and that he should be the one in charge, as he's without a shadow of doubt the single most powerful giant alive right now. Meanwhile, Hyrogin will help unite the two branches of giants, focusing on bringing the new peaceful ones into a society with the scattered old warrior ones. Now we also know that currently Elbaf's citizens are quite fragmented, but together I think that these two brothers could have the chance and the power to finally unite Elbaf as one powerful kingdom, a kingdom that Loki will lead into the final war as the sun god alongside Luffy, who is, you know, the actual sun god. And this of course brings us to two sun gods, one who leads in the light and one who operates in the shadows. Two very powerful fighters, but only one truly actually wields the power of Nika, who was of course the original sun god user. And I gotta be quite frank with you here, it just doesn't work if Luffy holds the actual sun god mantle, because he isn't a giant. I mean, the whole point of Road's weird introductory mini arc to Elbaf is pretty clear at this point. Road kidnaps Luffy and shows us that there are several giants who do not believe in following a non-giant character. This man does not like Luffy, and despite still following Hyrogin, doubts his faith in this non-giant human being. But what does he do instead? He puts on his fake sun god mask and plays God to pay tribute to the traditional giant power structure. What I'm trying to say here is that I think Oda's goal with this entire Road thing is to show us this doubt that many of the giants have in non-giant people, and set up the entire idea that a sun god is the person who will lead Elbaf, and that a sun god needs to be an actual giant for that to really work. We've already seen that not all of the giants will just respect or straight up follow Luffy, but they would follow a giant who follows Luffy. You know, kind of Road's entire weird little introduction serves as a small example of what Loki would eventually potentially become at the end of this arc. Am I making sense so far? Like, Road follows Hyrogin, so a sun god following a pirate leader, and by the end of the arc, or by the end of the story, Loki, the sun god, will follow the pirate king, who is Luffy. And this has been teased since the beginning of the very arc, before even Loki's introduction, I think. Now, admittedly, I think it's very easy to sort of forget about this because the Lego models and weird animal transformations at the beginning of Elbaf were a cause for a lot of confusion, I think, for all of us. But what we did kind of get out of this weird interaction is the reveal that Road, a member of Hyrogen's crew, the new giant warrior pirates, is, kind of a weirdo. And I do say that because he kidnaps the Straw Hats and then pretends to be the Sun God in his little Dungeons and Dragons setup for the prisoners of Elbaf. But then after that moment, I was kind of confident that this arc was going to be focused on Luffy defeating the real fake Sun God of Elbaf, who we found out was Loki a few chapters later. And that way, of course, Luffy could prove to the other giants that he was the next Joyboy and unite them together, blah, blah, blah. But clearly, that is just no longer the case, right? Like, Holy Knights are invading, Loki just straight up seems to be an ally, and we are being revealed crazy massive lore dumps about the entire world around random corners. So I don't know about you, but to me it's kind of starting to feel like Elbaf might actually end up being more like a bridging setup arc like Zou, rather than it being a primary big conflict arc like Wano or Dressrosa. And that's exactly why I really feel like we need to look deeper into this entire Sun God theme going on to really unravel what the point of Elbaf really is here for Oda, and why I think it's hinting at Loki's true role as one half of two sun gods. Now, of course, I can't speak for everyone here, but I really feel like once the Holy Knights, the mural, and the Harley text really hit the scene, some of the key details of this arc got pretty much ignored by a lot of people. For example, I feel like we aren't really talking much about the idea that the sun god is framed as both a creator and a good figure, but also as the god of destruction who the children fear from their legends and myths as well. Oda specifically gave us that in some of the chapters. So what's really going on with this? Why are there two very different types of sun gods in the eyes of the people? And does Luffy truly embody destruction the way that he embodies freedom and liberation? If you're a regular viewer, you might remember that I have theorized before that maybe the different reincarnations of Nika took on some different traits, and that's why, looking back through the ages, there is this kind of mixed perspective on what the sun god's true nature actually is. Sometimes good, sometimes destructive, sometimes bad. And there does seem to be definitely a lot of disagreement about this, at least between the different races, because we do know that, for instance, the Buccaneers looked at Nika as a solely good character, but possibly in the eyes of some of the giants, Joyboy was actually a destructive sun god, and Nika was the heroic one instead. Now, bringing this back to the mural, it would also line up pretty nicely with the first and second world text of the Harley. Here's what I think. In the first world, which seems to describe Nika's era before the Void Century, the sun god appears to save the people. Then afterwards, in the second world, the sun is what spreads the fires of war, which seems inherently much more like a destructive thing described by the giants when they talk about their more evil version of the sun god. But I'm actually kind of starting to think that that's not really the case, and I do think that in Joyboy's era, and even potentially in Nika's era, there wasn't just a single figure who adopted the title of sun god. And I'm pretty certain that this will also be the case in this modern era, or as the Harley describes it, the third world. Because instead of the different versions of the sun god being good or being bad, what if instead two people's actions have always been misattributed to just one character when history was finally written? If you're not sure what I'm talking about here, basically my idea here is that during Joyboy's era, there were also two people who led the crusade against Emu, and when history finally told their tale, these two figures kind of got merged and molded into one, which then created a sun god who both was the pinnacle of destruction, but also the warrior of liberation and joy. In reality though, maybe they were both just fighting for a just cause, and the second in command's actions were falsely attributed to the leader Joyboy as well. And this actually happens quite a lot in real history, where one person's actions get attributed to a different one, more famous person, because their relationship is so deeply intertwined. I think one great example that most of you were probably taught is that the one man who invented the light bulb was Thomas Edison, but in reality that invention was actually built on by like 5 different people in history. So what though, right? I'm gonna do the theorist thing here and bring up a point that makes kind of sense but has to be reinterpreted and applied to One Piece to fit the theory agenda. No, Okay, come on. Of course not. I'd never do this to you. This happens in One Piece as well, a lot. It's quite literally the backbone of Buggy's entire character. Everything that the entire world thinks that he did were all exclusively other people's actions. Not good enough for you? Well, history also described Garp as the big hero of the Marines due to his triumphant victory at God Valley, but in reality, he fought alongside Roger in order to defeat Rox. And I think probably maybe the best example is when Luffy defeated Crocodile, but instead the entire world now thinks that Smoker was the one who defeated the evil warlord. And I hope that this really hits home to you the idea that it's very normal in One Piece and in real history for two people's actions to get attributed to one single person, and seeing as Luffy is very often being framed to do things that he did not do, such as kidnapping Dr. Vegapunk, or is having his actions given to some other people, like Smoker or the Alabasta situation, I do think it's very much possible that this is gonna occur with him and did occur with Joyboy as well. And that's exactly the reason why I think that Joyboy also had a very destructive ally, someone with godlike powers whose battles and achievements during the Great Void Century War got then molded into Joyboy's character. And since I know you're gonna ask, I do think I do know exactly who that might have been, as we can see them very clearly depicted in my favorite panel, the mural. Editor, can you please put up the mural? Okay, now zoom in, enhance. All right, I told you one day I would come back and reveal the true identity of that fish. Now, I don't know why, but this fish kind of rubs me the wrong way. You just wait. I'm gonna find out your secret fish if it's the last thing I do. But unfortunately, today is not that day. Editor, zoom and enhance again. But on the right person this time. All right, yeah, this one. I'm about to explain to you why I believe that this man is the infamous Shadow Sun God, the second half of the whole. The legendary warrior who used their mighty power to almost defeat Emu, and instead of gaining the fame and glory, their actions were actually falsely attributed to Joyboy, thus creating this weird divide in Joyboy's character. Because again, in certain versions of his story, Joyboy's actions are adventurous and fun and benevolent, he's the warrior of liberation and all that, but in some others, he's described as a bringer of destruction and wrath. But I think it was actually this giant here who was responsible for all of that. And there are actually two big reasons I am very confident in this claim. All right, I guess you wanted to hear those reasons? My bad. I mean, I don't know, I thought you would maybe just trust me on this, but fine. All right. Well, the reasons are because of how Nika has been depicted throughout history, and as I've been discussing, Loki fitting that modern role really, really well. So why does Nika's depiction in history help boost my theory about Joyboy specifically? Well, I want you to take a closer look at the weapons used by what appears to be Joyboy and the ancient giant in our mural here on the left side. Joyboy appears to be wielding a sword as he battles this giant demon figure, and the ancient giant wields a mighty spear. A sword and a spear, And that's interesting because when Jarul talks to Luffy about Nika, he is depicted as wielding a sword and a shield, the very same way that Joyboy is depicted in that part of the mural. So, idea debunked? Wrong. I would argue it's super bunk, actually, because Nika has always been depicted as using a sword and a spear. Look here, during both the Kuma flashback and during Jinbei and Who's discussion in Wano, Nika is depicted as wielding a sword and a spear, which, as I just mentioned, are the two weapons that these two figures use as well in this mural. So this would line up pretty perfectly as a visual nod to the idea that the title is split between these figures during the Second World era. Nika, the original sun god of the First World, wielded both his sword and a spear, and then in the Second era, his reincarnation just used the sword, but his ally, the giant here, whose actions would later on to also get attributed to the sun god, is the person who wielded the sun god's spear. This time, two figures who represent the sun god who are depicted wielding the original weapons of Nika. I think a subtle nod that these two are both representations of the sun god figure. Now, do I think that these weapons are actual real weapons that do exist in the story and that Luffy will be using them? Maybe. I mean, it could be pretty cool, and I do think the idea that the giant sword on Elbaf was actually Joyboy's previously is pretty awesome, but also I do think that their symbolism is far more important here than their actual existence. And this actually actually also ties into something I've talked about before on this channel as well, which is the idea that Loki's devil fruit might actually turn out to be the Hellflame Serpent fruit. Because remember, the Hellflame Serpent is called out as the being that brings destruction to the entire world during the first part of the Harley text, and is depicted doing just that in the mural as well. And this actually kind of leads me to believe that this two people making one god theory might actually go back even further than just Joyboy's or Luffy's era. I think that Nika themselves may have actually been part of a dynamic duo. And there is an idea that's been floating around that points out the textures of the mural and how the ancient giant that I've been talking about has the very same pattern as the Hellflame Serpent. Once again, I think pointing at the idea that maybe it used a fruit that channeled its power, and now Loki is the one that has that very same fruit in the third era, since the giant's design is very similar to Loki's, let's be real here. And I gotta say, me personally, I really like this idea, and it actually might help explain what the Hellflame Serpent's role actually was during the first world of the One Piece era, because it may have been the second half of the god duo dynamic. Because when I actually went back and retranslated the actual Japanese phrase for the Serpent of Hellflame, it turns out that it would be much more accurately translated as a serpent with the hellish flames of retribution from Buddhism. And besides that just being a pretty cool metal album title, I think it also changes the way that you can interpret the entire first world text. Because suddenly, when you really read it as the Hellflame Serpent was tasked with punishing the guilty, it does seem a lot more likely that the Earth God that is being called out here might actually be synonymous with the Sun God, and the titles are being kind of used interchangeably here. In that case, the God of the Earth could also be the Sun God, and this kind of makes me think that Nika and the Serpent punished the greedy people who touched the Forbidden Sun together, forming yet another pair of gods in history. But I do also think that there is an incredibly fun and cool chance that the Earth God might also be Imu, meaning that Imu could also be the Shadow Sun God of the first world, as ironic as that would be. Which I just gotta say would be the coolest plot twist of all time. But honestly, regardless of how the title is really attributed, I do think that this only furthers the idea that Joyboy and this giant were a pair, and now Luffy and Loki will be a pair as well. Because it may just be the case that throughout One Piece history, there was always two sun gods. And let me just say, in our modern era, these two are absolutely broken. Like seriously, Luffy is next level powerful, and Loki's being framed to maybe even rival his power level, and that would easily make him straight out of the gate Yonko level. And I do think more and more characters are actually appearing with this high level of power in the final saga now, because the endgame of One Piece will be all Yonko level or higher fighters just duking it out in an all-out war. And if you really want to understand at what epic god level these characters will be operating, you should really check out that video right here where I talk about every Yonko level character in the One Piece story. Otherwise, thanks so much for watching, and I will hopefully see you in the next one. And also, shout out to all my dear Patreons. You guys rock. If you want to support the channel, please go do that.